Say it again. The voice came low, controlled, but it cut through the room sharper than any shout. The laughter died first. Then the music seemed to fade. Glasses hovered midair. Conversations froze like someone had pressed pause on the entire restaurant. 30 minutes earlier, no one had noticed her. Naomi Brooks moved the way she always did, quiet, precise, invisible by design. Black apron pressed flat, white shirt spotless, steps measured across polished marble floors that reflected a skyline worth billions. The rooftop restaurant sat 40 stories above Manhattan, where deals were whispered over $200 steaks and respect was often measured in net worth. Naomi carried a tray of crystal glasses, her posture steady, her expression calm. She had learned that calm was armor. Because in rooms like this, people didn't always see you. They saw your uniform. They saw your skin. And then they decided how much you mattered. It started with a voice just loud enough to travel. Hey you. She turned, professional smile already in place. The man at table 12 didn't look at her at first. He swirled his drink, watching the amber liquid like it was more important than the person standing in front of him. His suit was tailored, sharp lines, probably $5,000 without the shoes. His watch caught the light, something rare, something expensive. When he finally glanced up, it wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. Do they let anyone serve here now? He said, leaning back, letting the words hang just long enough for the table to react. A couple of quiet chuckles. One man looked away. Another smirked into his glass. Naomi felt it, the shift in the air. Not loud, not explosive, just heavy, familiar. She kept her voice even. Is there something I can get you, sir? He smiled, but it wasn't kind. Yeah, he said, tapping the table with one finger. Someone else. A pause. Then softer, but somehow worse. Someone who fits the place. No one stopped him. No one corrected him. Because rooms like this had rules. And one of them was silence. Naomi nodded once, small, controlled. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She turned, because sometimes dignity meant knowing when not to break in front of people who didn't deserve to see it. But what she didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire time. Not reacting, not interrupting, just observing. Ethan Caldwell sat alone at the far end of the room, a single glass of bourbon untouched in front of him. No one had approached his table. No one had needed to. Power has a way of creating its own space. His gaze hadn't moved when the man spoke, hadn't changed when the laughter followed. But something else had. Something quieter. Something sharper. He set his glass down. Slow. Deliberate. The sound barely audible. But it was enough. Chairs stopped shifting. A waiter mid-step hesitated. The room didn't know why, but it felt it. And then, finally, he stood. Not rushed. Not angry. Just certain. The kind of certainty money couldn't buy. The kind that made people look twice. Or look away. And when he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Say it again. The man blinked, caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief, like he had just realized the room was no longer on his side. He let out a short laugh, forced, brittle. I said. He began, leaning back in his chair, trying to reclaim the moment, that she does not belong here. His voice carried again, but it lacked the ease from before. Something had shifted. Something he could feel, but not control. Around him, the energy changed. The same people who had laughed just minutes ago now watched carefully, silently measuring the weight of what was happening. Because they knew that tone. They recognized it. The difference between a man speaking and a man who could decide what happened next. Ethan Caldwell did not move closer right away. He stood where he was, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, giving the words time to settle in the air like dust after something breaks. She belongs here more than you do, he said, calm, precise, every syllable placed exactly where it needed to land. A ripple moved through the room, quiet but undeniable. The man's smile tightened. Excuse me, he said, his voice sharpening now, searching for support that was no longer there. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the servers at nearby tables paused, their hands still, their attention fixed without meaning to be. Naomi had stopped walking. She stood a few steps away, tray still in her hands, unsure if she was supposed to leave or stay. This was not part of the script she had memorized for survival. Ethan took one step. Forward. Not aggressive. Not rushed. Just enough to make the distance feel smaller. You heard me, he said. Respect is not something you purchase with a reservation. The man scoffed, louder this time, clinging to arrogance like it was the last thing he had left. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, straightening his jacket, trying to rebuild the version of himself that had walked in confident. Ethan's expression did not change. "That is not the question you should be asking," he replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Intentional. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because it forces them to listen. Then, without raising his voice, he added, "The question is, do you know where you are?" A manager appeared near the edge of the room, drawn in by the silence more than the words. His eyes flicked from Ethan to the man at table 12, and immediately, his posture shifted. Subtle, almost invisible, but enough. The man noticed it too. The way authority moved without being announced. The way decisions were already forming before anyone spoke them out loud. "I am a paying customer," the man said, his voice now edged with something else. Not confidence. Not quite fear. Something in between. Ethan nodded once. "You were," he said. No emphasis. No anger. Just a statement. The kind that closes doors without slamming them. The manager stepped forward then, careful, composed. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave," he said, his tone professional but firm. The words landed heavier than they sounded. Around the room, people shifted again, but this time it was not discomfort. It was understanding. The kind that comes when power reveals itself without needing to prove it. The man looked around, searching for someone, anyone, to challenge it. But all he found were lowered eyes and quiet faces. The laughter was gone. The support had vanished. Because in that moment, everyone understood the same thing. Money could get you a seat at the table, but it could not guarantee you would be allowed to stay. The chair scraped softly against the polished floor as the man finally stood, slower this time, like the weight of the room had settled onto his shoulders. He adjusted his jacket again, but the gesture no longer carried confidence. It felt rehearsed, empty. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, not loud enough to challenge, just enough to save face. No one responded. Not his table. Not the strangers around him. The silence followed him as he walked toward the exit, a different kind of attention trailing behind him now. Not admiration. Not envy. Something closer to judgment. And then he was gone. The door closed quietly, but the effect lingered, like a ripple that refused to settle. For a moment, no one moved. The music had not stopped, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another room. Then slowly, conversations resumed, softer than before, more careful. Glasses clinked again, but the rhythm had changed. Because everyone had just witnessed something they could not ignore. Not a scene. Not an argument. A line. Naomi was still standing where she had paused, the tray in her hands suddenly heavier than it had been minutes ago. She was used to disappearing after moments like that, stepping back into the background before anyone could look too closely. But this time, she could not move. Not yet. Because now, people were looking. Not past her. At her. Ethan turned toward her then, his expression no longer sharp, no longer distant. It softened, just slightly, like the storm had already passed for him. He stepped closer, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to close the space that had once separated their worlds. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was simple, but it landed in a place she had learned to protect. Naomi blinked, surprised more by the tone than the words. She nodded once. "Yes, sir," she said automatically, the habit of professionalism still guiding her voice. Ethan glanced at the tray in her hands, then back at her. "You do not have to say that," he replied quietly. Another pause. Not uncomfortable. Just real. Naomi shifted her grip slightly, grounding herself. "It is part of the job," she said, her voice steady, but there was something beneath it now. Something honest. Ethan studied her for a moment, not in the way others had. Not measuring. Not judging. Just seeing. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. Because being seen meant being real. And being real in a room like this was not always safe. "No," he said finally, his voice calm but certain. "It is what they expect you to accept." The distinction hung between them. Clear. Unavoidable. Around them, the restaurant continued, but the space they stood in felt separate now, like a quiet pocket in the middle of something loud. Naomi lowered her gaze for a second, not out of submission, but to steady the thoughts she did not usually let surface. "It is easier that way," she admitted softly. Ethan nodded, understanding without agreeing. "Easier does not make it right," he said. The words were not heavy. They did not need to be. Because the truth rarely raises its voice. Naomi looked back up at him then, really looked this time. At the man who had changed the direction of an entire room with a single sentence. At the calm that followed him, not forced, not demanded. Chosen. Why did you step in? She asked before she could stop herself. The question slipped out, unplanned, but once it was there, she did not take it back. Ethan held her gaze, unshaken. And for the first time since he had stood up, there was something different in his eyes. Not authority, not control, something closer to reflection. Because, he said slowly, silence like that does not just protect the moment. He paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle. It protects the pattern. And that was when Naomi realized this had never been just about her. Naomi did not answer right away. The words stayed with her, echoing in a place she usually kept quiet. The pattern. She understood what he meant, even if she had never said it out loud before. Because it was never just one comment. Never just one night. It was the accumulation. The looks, the assumptions, the moments where people decided who you were before you ever spoke. She had learned to survive inside that pattern. To move through it without breaking. But now someone had stepped into it and refused to play along. And that changed something. Not just in the room. In her. She adjusted her grip on the tray again, grounding herself in something familiar. Most people do not notice it, she said softly. Ethan gave a slight nod. Most people benefit from not noticing, he replied. The truth in that sentence landed heavier than anything that had been said earlier that night. Around them, the rhythm of the restaurant continued to rebuild itself. A waiter laughed quietly at a distant table. A couple leaned closer over candlelight. The skyline outside the glass walls stretched endlessly, glowing. With opportunity and distance at the same time. Life moved on. It always did. But Naomi felt like she was standing slightly outside of it now, seeing the room from a different angle. She glanced toward the table where the man had been sitting. It was already cleared. Reset. As if nothing had happened. Clean lines. Perfect symmetry. No trace of discomfort. That was how places like this worked. They erased quickly. Efficiently. Ethan followed her gaze. It disappears fast, he said. Not a question. An observation. Naomi let out a small breath. It has to, she answered. People come here to feel comfortable. Ethan looked back at her, his expression thoughtful. Comfort and truth do not always share the same space, he said. Another pause. This one felt different. Less tense. More reflective. Naomi hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since he first stood up. You said something earlier, she began, her voice steady but quieter now. That they were testing you. Ethan's eyes held hers, calm but direct. They were, he said. No hesitation. No need to explain the obvious. Naomi frowned slightly, trying to understand. How? Ethan glanced around the room, then back at her. Power is not proven when everything is easy, he said. It is proven in moments like that. He nodded slightly toward the empty table. When no one expects you to do anything. Naomi absorbed that, the simplicity of it, the weight behind it. And if you had said nothing? She asked. Ethan did not look away. Then I would have been exactly like everyone else in that moment, he answered. No defensiveness. Just clarity. Naomi looked down for a second, then back up. But you are not, she said quietly. Ethan's expression shifted just slightly, something almost like humility passing through. Not because of what I have, he said. Because of what I choose. The distinction settled between them again, deeper this time. Choice. Not status. Not money. Naomi felt something loosen inside her chest, something she had held tight for longer than she realized. For years, she had believed that rooms like this belonged to people like him. That survival meant staying small, staying quiet, staying safe. But now she was seeing something else. That power did not always look the way she had been taught to expect. That sometimes it stood up, and sometimes it spoke. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving her space again, returning the balance without making it obvious. You handled yourself well, he said. Naomi almost smiled, just for a second. I handled it the only way I knew how, she replied. Ethan nodded once. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you handled it better than most people in this room ever could. Naomi did not respond, but this time, she did not look away either. And for the first time that night, the weight in her hands felt just a little bit lighter. The moment should have ended there. Quiet resolution. A return to normal. That was how places like this survived, by smoothing over tension before it could leave a mark. But something in the air refused to settle completely. Not for Naomi, and not for the people who had witnessed what just happened. Because even though the table had been reset, the memory had not. It lingered in glances that lasted a second too long, in conversations that lowered when she passed by, in the subtle shift of how people now looked at her. Not invisible anymore. And that was new. Naomi moved again, finally stepping back into her routine, delivering drinks, clearing plates, responding with the same calm professionalism she had always carried. But inside, something had changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make her aware of it. The difference between enduring and understanding. Across the room, Ethan had returned to his table, but he had not picked up his glass. It sat exactly where he left it, untouched, as if the night had shifted his appetite for more than just a drink. His gaze followed the movement of the room, but it paused, almost unconsciously, whenever Naomi crossed his line of sight. Not out of curiosity, not out of obligation. Something else. Recognition. Near the service station, two waiters whispered quietly, their voices low but their eyes occasionally drifting toward Naomi. "Did you see that?" one of them murmured. The other nodded. "I have never seen anyone shut a guest down like that," he replied. "Especially him." Naomi heard it. Not because she was trying to listen, but because moments like this made sound travel differently. She did not react. She had learned that attention could be just as dangerous as invisibility if you did not handle it carefully. But she could feel it now. The shift. Not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself standing in the same space. A few minutes later, the manager approached her, his expression composed but slightly tighter than usual. "Naomi," he said, keeping his voice even. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded, setting her tray down with practiced precision. They stepped just outside the main dining area, where the noise softened into a distant hum. The manager folded his hands briefly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I want you to know that you handled that situation professionally," he said. Naomi blinked, a little surprised. That was not the direction she expected. He continued, "And Mr. Caldwell has requested something." Naomi felt her shoulders tense slightly, though her expression did not show it. "Requested what?" she asked. The manager hesitated for half a second, just enough to signal that this was not routine. "He asked that you personally handle his table for the rest of the evening." The words settled between them, quiet but significant. Naomi did not respond immediately, not because she did not understand, but because she did. In a place where hierarchy was everything, requests like that were never small. The manager watched her, then added, "You are not required to accept, but I thought you should hear it directly." Naomi took a slow breath, steadying herself again. Across the glass wall, the city stretched endlessly, lights flickering like possibilities she had never fully allowed herself to consider. This was still her workplace, still her reality. But something about this moment felt different. Not like a favor, not like pity, something closer to respect. She nodded once. "I will take the table," she said. The manager gave a small nod in return, relief passing through his posture. "All right," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." As he walked away, Naomi stood there for just a second longer, gathering herself. Then she picked up her tray again, adjusted her shoulders, and turned back toward the room, toward the man who had changed the direction of the night. And this time, when she walked across the floor, she was not invisible. Naomi approached his table with steady steps. But this time, the distance felt different. Not because the room had changed, but because she had. The skyline stretched behind him, glass reflecting gold and steel, a view that most people in the city would never see in their lifetime. Yet Ethan Caldwell was not looking at it. He was watching her approach, not with expectation, not with impatience, but with a quiet awareness that made the moment feel intentional. She stopped at the table, posture straight, tray balanced effortlessly in her hand. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm, professional, but no longer distant. "Can I get you anything?" Ethan glanced at the untouched glass in front of him, then back at her. "You can start by sitting down," he said. The words were simple, but they did not belong in a place like this. Naomi blinked, just slightly. "I am working," she replied, her tone respectful but firm. Ethan nodded once, as if he expected that answer. "Then stand," he said, a faint hint of something lighter in his voice now. "But not like you are invisible." The sentence landed differently than anything else that had been said that night. Naomi felt it, not as pressure, but as permission. She adjusted her stance, subtle but real, shifting from practiced neutrality to something more present. "What would you like, sir?" she asked again. Ethan finally reached for his glass, lifting it, but not drinking. "What do you recommend?" he asked. It was a question she had answered hundreds of times, maybe thousands. But tonight, it did not feel routine. Not because of the menu, because of the way he asked. Like her answer mattered. Naomi glanced briefly at the menu, then back at him. "The ribeye is popular," she said. 16 ounces, aged, served with roasted potatoes. Ethan watched her, listening. "But," he prompted. Naomi paused for a second, then allowed herself something she usually kept back. Honesty. "But the sea base is better," she said. "It is lighter, cleaner. Most people order what looks impressive, not what actually tastes right." A small silence followed. Not awkward, just enough for the truth to settle. Ethan nodded slowly. "Then I will have the sea base," he said. No hesitation. No second-guessing. Naomi wrote it down, her movement smooth, but inside, something shifted again. Not because of the order, because he trusted her judgment without needing to prove it first. "And something to drink?" she asked. Ethan set the glass back down. "Water is fine," he said. Naomi nodded, then turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Naomi." She froze for a fraction of a second. Not because of the name itself, but because he used it. She turned back. "Yes." Ethan held her gaze, steady, respectful. "You do not have to earn respect in a room that should already know how to give it," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Not like a lesson, not like a correction, like a reminder. Naomi felt her breath catch, just slightly, before she steadied it again. "Some rooms forget," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Then maybe they need to be reminded more often," he replied. Another pause. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not tense, just real. Naomi gave a small nod, then turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps still measured, still controlled. But not the same, because now, with every step, she could feel it more clearly. She was not just moving through the room anymore. She was part of it. The kitchen doors swung open with a soft push, and the noise shifted instantly. The polished calm of the dining room gave way to controlled chaos. Orders called out, pans sizzling, footsteps moving with urgency across tile floors that had seen thousands of nights just like this. Naomi stepped inside, but tonight, the rhythm felt different under her skin. Not faster, not slower, just clearer. She placed the order, her voice steady, then moved to the service counter, hands resting lightly against the edge as she exhaled, just once. It was not exhaustion. It was adjustment, because something had changed, and her mind was still catching up to it. "You good?" a voice beside her asked. It was Marcus, another server, his tone casual, but his eyes more observant than usual. Naomi nodded. "I am fine," she said, automatic at first. Then she paused, just slightly. "Better than fine." Marcus raised an eyebrow, half amused. "That is new," he said. Naomi allowed a small smile, brief but real. "It is," she replied. The moment passed quickly, as all moments did in places like this. Orders came up. Plates were arranged with precision. The head chef nodded once toward her, signaling that the dish was ready. Naomi picked up the plate, careful, balanced, the heat rising just enough to remind her of the present. Then she turned and stepped back toward the dining room. The doors opened again, and the noise softened, returning to that controlled elegance the guests expected. But Naomi did not slip back into invisibility this time. She walked with the same measured steps, but there was something else now. Not defiance. Not performance. Presence. Ethan looked up as she approached, not because he was waiting, but because he noticed. There was a difference between those two things. She placed the plate in front of him with precision. "Sea base," she said, "with lemon butter and roasted vegetables." Ethan glanced at the dish, then back at her. "You were right," he said, even before tasting it. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "You have not tried it yet," she replied. Ethan gave a faint smile, almost unnoticeable. "I trust the recommendation," he said. Another small shift. Another moment that did not need to be large to matter. Naomi stepped back, but this time, she did not rush away. She remained present, just long enough to see him take the first bite. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second after tasting it, then gave a small nod. "You were right," he repeated. This time, There was no assumption, just confirmation. Naomi felt something settle inside her, something steady and unfamiliar in the best way. Not pride, not relief, something quieter. Validation without needing approval. Around them, the restaurant continued its rhythm, but there were still glances. Subtle, curious. People who had seen what happened earlier were still watching, still recalibrating what they thought they understood about the room. A woman at a nearby table leaned slightly toward her companion, whispering something under her breath. A man who had once barely acknowledged the staff now gave a small nod when Naomi passed. Not dramatic, but noticeable. Change rarely arrives loudly. It shows up in small adjustments. Ethan set his fork down and looked up at her again. "Tell me something," he said. Naomi met his gaze. "Yes." Ethan gestured slightly around the room. "Do you think they learned anything tonight?" Naomi followed his gesture, her eyes moving across the tables, the conversations, the carefully maintained image of normalcy. She considered the question, not rushing to answer, because she understood what he was really asking. Not about the moment, about the impact. She looked back at him, her expression calm, thoughtful. "Some of them did," she said. "Some of them will forget by tomorrow." A pause. Honest. Clear. Ethan nodded slowly. "And you?" he asked. Naomi did not hesitate this time. "I will not forget," she said. The certainty in her voice did not need to be loud. It was enough that it was real. Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good," he said quietly. And in that single word, there was no instruction, no expectation, just acknowledgement. Naomi stepped back then, returning to her work, but not to who she was before. Because now, every step she took carried something new. Not something given, something realized. By the time the plates were cleared and the candles burned lower, the night had settled into something quieter, but not the same. Conversations flowed again, but with a different tone, like everyone was speaking just a little more carefully than before. The skyline outside remained unchanged, endless and bright, but inside the room, something invisible had shifted. Naomi moved between tables with practiced ease, but now each step felt anchored, intentional. She no longer adjusted herself to disappear. She simply existed within the space, and that alone changed how the space responded to her. A man at table 6 thanked her directly, meeting her eyes instead of speaking past her. A couple paused their conversation when she approached, giving her their full attention without realizing it. These were small things, almost unnoticeable, but they added up. They always did. Across the room, Ethan finished his meal slowly, not rushing, not distracted. When Naomi returned to collect the plate, he placed his fork down neatly and looked up at her again. "That was exactly what I needed," he said. Naomi gave a slight nod. "I am glad," she replied. Her voice carried the same calm professionalism, but there was something steadier beneath it now. Not distance. Presence. Ethan reached for the check, but before she could step away, he spoke again. "Do you plan to stay here long?" The question caught her slightly off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was personal. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered honestly. "For now," she said. "It pays the bills." Ethan studied her for a moment, as if weighing something unspoken. "And what is not?" he asked. Naomi almost smiled at that. "Most things that matter," she replied. The honesty did not feel risky this time. It felt earned. Ethan leaned back slightly, considering her answer. "That is usually how it starts," he said. Naomi tilted her head. "What does?" she asked. Ethan's gaze shifted briefly toward the city beyond the glass, then back to her. "People learning what they are worth," he said. The words landed softly, but they carried a direction, not an instruction, a possibility. Naomi did not respond immediately, because for a long time, worth had been something measured by survival, by how much she could carry without breaking, by how well she could stay quiet when needed. But now, standing here, something about that definition felt incomplete. "And what if they already know?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not hesitate. "Then the question becomes whether they are willing to act like it," he said. Another pause followed, but this one felt different. Not uncertain. Open. Naomi glanced around the room again, taking in the same tables, the same lights, the same people. Nothing had changed on the surface, and yet everything felt slightly altered, like she was seeing it for the first time without the filter she had built to protect herself. Ethan placed the check back on the table, but did not slide it toward her yet. You handled tonight with more control than most executives I have worked with, he said. Naomi blinked, not expecting that comparison. I am not an executive, she replied. Ethan's expression remained steady. Titles are assigned, he said. Control is chosen. The distinction settled in again, deeper this time. Naomi felt it, not as pressure, but as recognition. She had not changed roles. She had not changed uniforms. But something inside her had shifted, and now it was beginning to show. Ethan finally slid the check toward her, but as she reached for it, he added one more sentence. If you ever decide this room is too small for you, he said, his voice calm but certain, it is not the only one you are allowed to stand in. Naomi held the check for a second longer than necessary, the words echoing quietly in her mind. Then she nodded once, composed, steady. I will remember that, she said. And this time, it was not just a polite response. It was a decision beginning to form. The check was settled. The plates were gone. And slowly, table by table, the night began to fold into its final shape. Coats were gathered. Conversations softened into goodbyes. The kind of quiet ending that expensive places perfected, where nothing ever seemed out of place, even after something had clearly shifted. Ethan stood from his seat without hurry, adjusting his jacket with the same calm precision he had carried all evening. There was no announcement, no need for one. People noticed anyway. They always did. Naomi approached as he stepped away from the table, her posture steady, her expression composed. Thank you for dining with us, she said, her voice even, but no longer distant. Ethan paused, just for a second, then looked at her fully, not as a guest to a server, not as a billionaire to an employee, just as one person to another. Thank you for staying, he replied. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper than courtesy. Naomi held his gaze, understanding more than he said. Not everyone does, she answered quietly. Ethan gave a small nod, acknowledging the truth in that. Around them, the last of the evening crowd filtered toward the elevators, the city lights waiting below like a different world entirely. For a moment, neither of them moved. Not because they had more to say, because some moments did not need more words. They needed space to settle. Finally, Ethan stepped back, giving a slight nod that felt more like respect than goodbye. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, his presence fading into the same doors he had entered through, but leaving something behind that could not be carried out. Naomi stood there for a second longer, watching the space he left behind, not empty, just different. Then she turned back to the room. The staff moved into closing rhythm now, resetting tables, stacking glasses, preparing for another night that would look the same but never quite be the same again. Marcus passed by her, carrying a tray, and gave her a look that said more than words could. Long night, he said lightly. Naomi nodded once. Different night, she replied. He smiled, understanding enough not to ask more. As the lights dimmed slightly and the music softened, Naomi walked toward the large glass window at the edge of the room. The city stretched out beneath her, millions of lights, millions of stories, each one moving in its own direction. For years, she had looked at that view as something distant, something she served but did not belong to. But tonight, something had shifted. Not the city, not the job, her. She rested her hand lightly against the glass, cool beneath her fingertips, grounding her in the moment. Behind her, the room continued to reset, returning to perfection, ready to erase the night and begin again. But she knew something it could not erase. She did not need permission to stand in a room like this. She never had. She had just been taught to believe otherwise. Naomi straightened her shoulders, not as a performance, not as a defense, but as a choice. A quiet one, a real one. And as she turned away from the window, stepping back into the space she once moved through unseen, there was no hesitation in her stride. Because this time, she was not just part of the room. She understood her place in it. Not given, not earned through silence. Claimed. And somewhere in the distance of the city below, the world continued exactly as it always had. But for Naomi Brooks, everything had already changed.